particularly with late fees because you had to file late and pay late, then we want to listen to that story, and we want to be accepting of things and waive those fees if it's all possible. I will say this, that one byproduct of the COVID-19 is that more people are paying online than ever before. So this year, 65% of all property taxes in the county of San Diego were paid electronically, which is a big jump for us from last year's 62%. But it speaks well of people's ingenuity and abilities to figure out that there's no sense driving down to an office just to drop something off in a window, and or figuring out where the stamp is that you're going to mail with, and then trying to get it out and postmarked by the due date. So we're encouraging more people to use online payment abilities because they're there and they're very easy to work. I think for further information on paying online, sdttc.com. sdttc.com is our website, and it will get you every answer that you're looking for, we hope. If not, you have the ability to call us, and that number is listed there as well. But I think in moving down a little bit to the next slide, just some stats that are of interest, I think, a little bit of intrigue. 50% of our workforce now is teleworking. That means that they are working from home, and they are executing their jobs very well every day and very productively, I should add. We're very pleased with the results, but this was an effort to protect not only the public and the taxpayers of San Diego County by closing our counters, but it was an effort to protect our employees of equal importance to us, because without them, we're not anything in terms of our abilities to meet the goals and the deadlines and the budgets of the dollars collected. It's important also to remember that this is a local tax for all intensive purposes. So the property taxes pretty much stay in San Diego once they're collected, and they are distributed to all 18 cities throughout the county, all 42 public school districts throughout the county, all 5 community college districts throughout San Diego County. And you can see too that understand that these monies really go to paying salaries for first responders, fire, police, people who are public servants who do the work of many out in the streets of our respective cities and the county areas. So it's important that these dollars come in and that they get collected and then subsequently distributed out to where they belong, so that they can be put to work. I think that another thing that's interesting in terms of the allocations, just from a standpoint of seeing a pie chart here, we think it tells the story pretty well, but if you look at it carefully, you see that 45% of every dollar, in other words, 45 cents on every dollar goes back to schools and education. In public sector, public schools, public education. The library derives monies here. The county pulls in 13.2% only for discretionary spending. So that number, if you thought it was huge before, this puts it in perspective, I think, because it's not that large an amount to do the job that needs to be done in all 5 supervisorial districts throughout the county of San Diego. But there are other things too on this chart. The last I wanted to comment on was, you'll see on the upper right-hand corner on this chart, 11.6% is allocated toward redevelopment agencies and redevelopment, the property trust that was set up. Remember that redevelopment agencies went bye-bye a few years ago, I think, when Jerry Brown came in for his 3rd term as governor, and had understood, maybe like many do not understand, because he had also served in the interim as mayor of a city in the Bay Area, and he saw what redevelopment agencies were doing or weren't doing, and he felt strongly enough to try to do away with the concept of redevelopment agencies. Unfortunately, there are a lot of liabilities and a lot of monies owed still to pay down the debts, meaning long-term bond issuances primarily. So it might be that 20, 30, 40-year bonds were let and issued some years ago, but are still not paid off. So this money was by law set aside to make sure that those debts were paid in full down the road. Now, at some point, that 11.6% will be up for allocation and reallocation amongst the others, and that could boost allocations to other jurisdictions. Remember, I think there were 17 different redevelopment agencies in San Diego at the time. If I could go to the next slide, please, that would be helpful. I think a lot of people also don't know that we manage a lot of money for the various agencies throughout San Diego County that are public. 210 different public agencies, in fact, use us as a bank to manage the assets that come back to them through bond issuances or a variety of other fee generators. And those monies are put into an investment pool, which we manage on a day-to-day basis. This past, well, actually spring, we hit $12.3 billion in the pool to manage. It's a daunting task when you think about it, but we have very, very, very professional team members who are there every morning, just like a broker in the brokerage firm is, to oversee the investments that we do. And it's very important that this money stay stable and available. So we are very conservative in our abilities to manage those monies for the 210 agencies we manage for. I think the other thing that sometimes comes up is the fact that under the law, the treasurer tax collector of every county that has their own pension system, there are 20 of us out of 58 counties, manage another investment pool, which is the pension system money. And this past spring, it hit $11.9 billion. And these numbers are very accurate. So they do reflect the up and down mood swings of the marketplace. I think we all can relate to what happened in breathtaking fashion just a couple of months ago, but the market has been pretty good, and the market has bounced back in many ways, and particularly in our case, because we had a pretty conservative, again, conservative, important here to consider, portfolio that took a lot less leverage and a lot less risk off the table over 5 years ago. So we're benefiting from that, and we're pleased with that. The last couple of things here I wanted to speak with you about is the whole notion of penalty cancellation and the requests for same. This has presented unprecedented problems for many here in San Diego County, as well as up and down the state. And people, in many cases, were unable to make those payments in early April when they were due on April 10th. We wanted to show as much compassion and understanding as we possibly could, and we set out to extend the time limit from April 10th to, at the time, June 30th, to get those payments in, and then file with your check to pay those payments, a little synopsis and a little summary of why you think you should not have to pay a penalty for being late, because it ties somehow to the virus and the pandemic that we're involved in. So on the right-hand side here, I'm sure center screen for you, is a 4-step process. It's very easy, and it asks you again to go to our website at SD San Diego Treasurer Tax Collector, TTC, sdttc.com. Fill out a penalty cancellation request and include payment and printed documentation as to what happened and how the pandemic affected your abilities to pay on time. I will tell you that we have had over 2,000 requests for those penalty cancellations, and to date, we have granted nearly 50% of those in the high 40% areas. Normally, in a year, as we measure backwards over the last 5 years, We've received anywhere from 550 to 1,000 requests for such forgiveness and cancellation. This year, it's much higher, obviously. And the number is exactly, as of 2 days ago, 2,194 requests. And of those, 48% plus some were actually approved. And in many cases, what we found was in rejecting or denying the appeal for cancellation, people did not include, as they were asked to do, a written statement as to what happened that tied them to this terrible situation. And it would be maybe as simple as showing a copy of a pink slip if you lost employment in your job, or maybe it was a receipt that was received from the state when you filed for insurance benefits under the law to employment benefits, that is, to receive some sort of help from the state for being unemployed. Those are the kinds of things, along with medical situations and other situations that were unavoidable to many people. And we want to be very liberal in our interpretation of these documents that are submitted. And we take everything very seriously and look at every issue on a case-by-case basis. So many of those who were denied previously can still resubmit and include all the things that are listed here. In other words, fill out the official request, include payment for the taxes, just the payment without the late fee, and printed documentation as to why there's a tie here or connection, and then send it in the mail to the Treasurer Tax Collector's office. Very straightforward, and we're happy to look at any questions that you might have about that. I think it's important too, and especially to this group, if you are a small business owner or own the home that you're living in, you can file this penalty cancellation request still. And you can go again onto our website, sdttc.com, and look at the executive order, which the governor signed into law recently, but it extends the penalty cancellation deadline to May 5th, 2021. And that's really the information we have. There's not a lot out there, but that is what was approved. I'd be happy really to take any questions that you might have at this time. Again, it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I know that the conditions in the economy and the conditions in general are not optimal because we in San Diego lead a privileged life, I think, a very, very, very wonderful place to be and a great place to raise families and things of that sort. But we want to see that quality of life maintained, and we want to see good things happen. And we know from our standpoint that many of the services that are provided can't happen unless there's money to pay for them. And that's why we encourage everybody, if they have not paid their taxes, to step up and pay them and make that happen, because it does reflect on everybody's personal use of roadways, sewage lines, water lines, you name it, it's there, and it's all part of the public policies that govern our governments here.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. I have one question, and,
Sure.
Anyone else that has a question can either, like I said, put it in the chat box or just unmute yourself and ask the question. But so many people had already paid their property taxes before this hit, and might not be as impacted until the next cycle. Do you think those cancellation requests will continue to be looked on favorably coming into the next cycle?
Absolutely. Our commitment to the community is that we want to be compassionate. We want to show mercy, in essence, on people who have had difficulties paying those taxes. And we will do everything within our powers and our abilities to help them get through this. We, like you, really don't know what's going to happen with the next cycle of collections. This cycle happened to fall into a place in time where, 36% of our collections come in from things called impound accounts. And that is where people actually pay a little more for their mortgage every month. And then the bank that they receive the money from for the purchase pays the taxes. And by having that automatic jumpstart, it puts us ahead of other counties who don't have those kinds of numbers to share with their constituents.
Okay, thank you. And we do have another question in the chat box here. How do people apply for a reduction of property value, especially commercial property?
Sure. If you'll go on to this assessor's website, the county assessor, Ernie Dronenberg, Ernie's office controls that. Ernie's office has, I believe, I want to say over 100 different appraisers that comb the county and are available all the time to talk with people about challenging or questioning the valuations that come forward on their tax bills. The next wave of tax bills, by the way, reflecting backwards in time, the close of what's called the tax roll, will reflect on the next bills. But if you'll note on the bills, when you receive them, there is a way to appeal the valuations. And I think it's best to actually call the assessor's office, and they can help whomever it is answer those questions and get some help. You may remember that probably back as late as the last recessionary time we went through, sadly, of maybe 4 or 5 years total, there was a huge number, and the number of people who really felt that they had been overtaxed because the valuations had plummeted so much after they purchased the properties. So 220,000 people, as I understand it, appealed their assessments, and quite a large number were granted dispensation and a lowering of the value. So it resulted in refunds, which our office was involved in, and it was substantial. It was millions of dollars that went back to the public. So I think it's important for people to know it's their right twice a year to actually file an appeal as to the valuation. And there is an assessment appeals board, if it goes that far, that people can actually present their case to other citizens that make up this board, and they can have the final say in whether or not there's a reduction. But I think I would try the assessor's office first. They're very, very competent. They do a great job, and they, like us, are there to help you.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions. One of them looks like should we expect an increase in taxes, just as normal?
Well, it depends on where you live, actually. And I think it also depends on how you interpret your tax bill. From the basic protected by Prop 13 situation, there's not going to be any more than a 2% of 1% increase on taxes if the variables are as they should be, modeling after the cost of living index and averaged between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and whatever those numbers are, we have to abide by, which seems patently unfair to me coming from San Diego. The last thing I want to do is be compared to anything in LA. It's not high on my list, but nevertheless, I think it's important that we go through that process.
And we had one more question about the status of Prop 13. I do want to mention that Assessor Dronenberg's office will be doing a presentation on that at our August 6th meeting. But I don't know if you have any comments on that, Mr. McAllister?
Well, I must tell you that Ernie and his team are very, very well in tune to that particular initiative that's coming up on the ballot. And in many ways, this is something that the assessor's offices around the state in all 58 counties are going to have to grapple with in terms of just processing and splitting a tax roll, for instance, if this thing were to pass. There could be, as Ernie has explained to me, there could be huge increases in expenses to allocate the machinery and the mechanisms to do the split roll thing, for one example. So I think you're in good hands. I was going to even suggest that you call Ernie and call his office, because they're always ready to come out and explain what it is they do and the way that they weave their work in with ours and vice versa.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, I don't see any others in the chat box. So with that, Mr. McAllister, I want to thank you and your staff for being here with us this morning. You're welcome to stay in the meeting, or I know you have, I'm sure you have other things that you need to do, but just thank you so much for your time.
Well, it's a pleasure, Scott. Anytime you guys need more information, please contact us. We're always happy to be here, and we thank you very much for the hospitality. North County, go.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Good. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vartan from the U.S. Chamber. We know there's a lot going on at the federal level, so Vartan is going to give us an update.
Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate you providing us with this opportunity to come and speak to you, and really want to thank you, Scott, and your entire team at the Oceanside Chamber for all the work that you've done to help support small businesses during this really, really difficult time. I know a lot of small businesses have been counting on you for support and getting information about some of the federal loan programs, so we're very grateful for that and for your leadership. Wanted to touch base about some of the loan programs that are currently underway. Of course, the PPP program, which many of you are now familiar with, expired a couple of days ago, but the Senate and the House have both now passed separate pieces of legislation which would extend the PPP loan program through August. The legislation is waiting to be signed by President Trump, and we think he will do that because it's been providing a lifeline for small businesses to be able to continue to operate during the shutdowns. So we're encouraged that there's still funding available. It's about $130 billion. And I think that once the president signs this legislation, it'll allow for more businesses to pursue that money if they so wish. Going forward, besides the PPP program, Congress is now taking a very careful look at an additional stimulus program. The House last month passed the HEROES Act, which included continued funding for businesses as well as for individuals with regards to COVID. Moving forward, the Senate will now be pursuing legislation probably by the end of July. We're not quite sure exactly what it'll look like, but we're convinced that it will have some kind of additional stimulus money. The HEROES Act had $1,200 for individuals. President Trump is talking about having another stimulus check go out at least for $1,200. This morning he was saying that it could be even for more. There's also going to be some relief for businesses. They're trying to right now decide what that'll look like. Will it look like additional loan programs for the industries that have been struggling the most? I know some sectors like theaters or event companies are going to be having a difficult time going forward, with anything that involves crowds. So there might be more targeted funding that goes to certain sectors, or it could be targeted towards regions of the country that are experiencing more difficulties or there are more COVID hotspots. So we're monitoring that very carefully. One additional element to an additional stimulus bill is this issue about 501c6 organizations. 501c6s are nonprofits, including chambers of commerce, that unfortunately were not eligible for PPP money in the last round. At the U.S. Chamber, we've been working with state and local chambers to encourage the federal government to allow for chambers to also participate in this. Chambers, as you've seen with Scott and the Oceanside Chamber, at the local level, they're on the front line supporting businesses. So we believe that they should be eligible for forgivable loans. We've made a very, very strong effort to push for it. We're sending additional letters and doing additional lobbying in Washington to make sure that they're eligible. We'll probably be sending out an additional letter to Congress about this as the stimulus bill gets tied together. The House version fortunately had funding available for 501c6s, but the Senate version, we're not sure whether it will. But we are going to make a strong effort. So as chamber members, please, if you've got stories about how the chamber has helped you over the past several months, please keep those handy because we might be calling on you soon to provide some testimony to Congress about that. So we thank Scott and what the chamber's been doing, and we think that they should also be eligible for some of these loan programs. A lot of whether there'll be an additional stimulus and what it'll look like will depend on the jobs numbers. Fortunately, this morning there were some very, very positive job numbers. There were almost 5 million jobs created last month. I think that has to do with a lot of the reopenings that have been taking place across the country, but it remains to be seen whether that will sustain as we're experiencing more shutdowns. Like I know in California here, we're going to be, many of the counties will be shutting down once again for small businesses. So depending on how the unemployment levels go, it'll determine how big of a stimulus push that they make in Congress at the end of this month. Another issue that I want to talk about with regards to COVID is this issue of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. USMCA is the new version of NAFTA, which was approved last year by Congress. 95% of USMCA is similar to NAFTA. This affects agriculture, especially here in California. So we're very pleased with its passage. It didn't take effect until yesterday. July 1st was the official kickoff date. And we expect it to reap a lot of positive benefits for California, for San Diego, for various parts of the country. What's interesting going forward on the issue of trade is this issue of supply chains. Unfortunately, during the coronavirus period, there's been a lot of disruption to supply chains. So there's been a push on the federal level to bring more manufacturing back home from overseas, especially when it comes to PPE and for pharmaceuticals, just because whenever we're experiencing a shutdown such as the one we are right now, it really disrupts our flow of goods, especially critical goods like medical devices that I discussed. So you'll be seeing that issue bubble up quite a bit in the next few weeks. There is this push to have made in America products as a result of the disruption of supply chains. So expect that to be a relevant issue going in the next few months now. And finally, I want to discuss the National Summit of Equality of Opportunity that was recently hosted by the U.S. Chamber, where we completely understand that there is a gap for people of color in advancing in the business community. We want to do everything that we can on the federal level to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to advance, whether it's in business or in education. We're working with national leaders to narrow that gap and to eliminate that gap so everybody has a fair shot at the American dream. And that's what free enterprise is about, and that's what we work on at the U.S. Chamber on a daily basis. I know I've covered a wide swath of issues. I'm happy to go to answer any questions about it. If you haven't applied for a PPP program, PPP loan so far, we encourage you to sit tight. I think the president's going to sign this legislation any day now. So there will be an opportunity to pursue those funds very soon. And also, we'll see what comes of the next stimulus bill. If you've received PPP funding and you're continuing to struggle, there might be additional relief for you available. So thank you, Scott. With that, I'll turn it over back to you.
Thank you, Vartan. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but if anybody has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and share the question. No, well, okay. I do want to thank you for the efforts on behalf of the 501c6 organizations, because it is very important, and I do want to acknowledge that Congressman Levins' office has been supportive of the 501c6s being part of the PPP. So Vartan, thank you very much for your efforts. And so while we're on the theme of federal government, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle to give us an update from Congressman Levins' office.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, Vartan really provided a great overview of some of the hot issues that are going on, so I'll try not to speak too much to those and maybe get a little more local. Congressman Levin was excited to release a long-awaited report about San Onofre, the nuclear waste, spent nuclear fuel storage that's going on there as they decommission the plant. He convened a task force right after he got into office to try to deal with how we can safely store it while it's there and accelerate getting it out of there. So that report was released. You can see it on our website. And this was a task force of 30 experts, stakeholders from our cities throughout the district. And they came up with 30 different recommendations. Some of them were rather technical, others that are kind of more common sense, but that aren't currently part of the discussion. So hopefully we'll be able to move the discussion forward. And importantly, the congressman himself took away 8 actions that he's going to be really focusing on, including trying to really push for a nuclear waste administration. Right now you have kind of the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission kind of fighting over who really is in charge of kind of the fuel, the spent nuclear fuel. And it's led to this impasse that we're kind of into. There's other politics, of course, that are part of the issue, but we're hoping that that might be able to really, by putting somebody in charge of taking the waste, get it out of San Onofre, because it's not the right place for it to be. I want to also mention this. We're hoping for good news on this one. 2 weeks ago, Congressman Levins sent a letter in support for the city of Oceanside as part of this new Department of Defense program that's going to give money. It's a pilot program, so we're hoping we're competitive. It would give money to communities that have infrastructure that support military facilities. So infrastructure in the actual civilian side. So these could be things like roads going on to base and other things like that. Obviously, Oceanside has a lot of our infrastructure that is impacted of and supportive of Camp Pendleton. So specifically, this was an application for the construction of the new fire station #1. Fire station #1 is right down there by the Museum of Art, historical, but barely can fit the engines that we have down there, and definitely is not equipped to be able to deal with the growing demands of the new buildings that are coming into downtown, especially the taller buildings that are going to need much taller ladders and things like that. So the city's building a new fire station #1 either way in order to deal with that. Hopefully this will bring federal funding to ease that burden on the city. And again, it's a pilot program, so we're hopeful that we're really competitive. Congressman Levins currently on a plane right now, back from DC. He was there for the last week doing votes and actually leading a hearing and being part of another hearing. So the work in Washington's going on despite kind of the restrictions around the pandemic. They took a number of votes on a number of different legislation, but one of the ones that I really want to highlight is the Moving Forward Act. It's HR 2. It's basically the big infrastructure bill that people have been talking about for quite a while. It was the number 2 priority of the House of Representatives, which is why it's HR 2. Big investment in infrastructure, which I think, as we all understand, when you're talking about the government spending money, in terms of the best bang for your buck, spending on our infrastructure is the best way to get the economy growing in a longer term. So he was very excited to vote for that, but also happy that it included a number of his bills. So it's a huge package with lots of different pieces, but one of the bills that he had actually introduced was included in this package. So if this becomes law, that bill would become law as well. That one is the Desalination Development Act. Pretty self-explanatory by the title. It basically supports funding for desalination projects, which there is one in our district up in South Orange County, but it could support future projects as well as part of the WIN Act. So we're hopeful that will eventually get signed into law and provide support for more desalination projects to provide water reliability for our region. I want to mention also the Restaurants Act. It's HR 7197 for those who are part of the restaurant industry, particularly independent restaurants. This would provide a $120 billion grant program to help independent restaurants make it through the pandemic. So we're really hoping that one's going to go forward as well as part of these economic recovery efforts. I won't spend much time talking about the HEROES Act, but just to echo Vartan's mention of the HEROES Act is the next coronavirus relief package. The congressman voted for that. Important to be able to prevent massive cuts in our local government, which would be really cutting into the bone at this point. Cities like Oceanside have been really smart about being efficient and not, adding a lot of fat after the last recession. So now that they're facing massive revenue losses, we're talking about really cutting into some essential services. The federal government's the only source of protection from those layoffs at this point. And so the HEROES Act includes money for that, as well as, increase unemployment and some of the other parts that Vartan mentioned. It also increases testing. We're seeing not just in places, around the country that are having spikes like Texas, problems with testing, but even in Orange County, right above us. The delays to be able to get test results are increasing 2 to 3 days more than yesterday now to be able to get the results. So we really do need to be able to have that federal support for testing. So we're really hoping the Senate comes together and tries to get their act together to pass a bill so that we can negotiate on a bill between the House and the Senate and get something passed. And I will wrap up with an invitation to everybody who's on here. The Chamber, thank you for sending this out, our tourism roundtable. event coming up on Monday. So obviously tourism is a bedrock of our economy here locally. So the Congressman's convening a group of folks to be able to talk about kind of the path to recovery for the tourism industry. That's this Monday at 2:30 p.m. Everybody's welcome. It's going to be a Zoom webinar as long as we don't hit capacity, which would be a good problem. But we're going to have a whole gamut of our local tourism representatives from Legoland and the fairgrounds. But our local mayor, Peter Weiss of Oceanside, is going to be on there. Our assembly member to talk from the state perspective, the regional tourism authority. So we really hope you'll join us. I will share the link, the Eventbrite link, so you can RSVP and join us on Monday at 2:30. And with that, I will wrap up and hand it back to Scott.
Thank you, Kyle. And I was really pleased to get the email from your office regarding the Restaurants Act, and we're going to help with outreach to our restaurants to make sure that we get a lot of people on that Zoom call for that conversation. So thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Fernando from Assemblymember Tasha Borner-Horvath's office.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, the Assembly member has been really busy on economic recovery by working with our colleagues in the State Assembly, with Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon, and here with the communities throughout our district through her participation, like in the Oceanside Recovery Task Force. The Assembly member has had several conversations with economists throughout the state as well to try to figure out what the best ways are to mitigate the impacts of this pandemic, and she has introduced legislation that was kind of born from these conversations. So the Assembly members AB 1492 was created to reduce barriers for companies to allow their employees to telecommute. So we've seen since the outbreak of the pandemic, a lot of companies shift from having their teams working in an office to allowing them to work at home to protect them and to protect their clients as well. And we've seen other benefits from telecommuting, such as reducing greenhouse gases by taking cars off the road, giving employees another opportunity for better work-life balance, and also to reduce gender gaps within the labor force to give more opportunities for single working moms, for example, the opportunity to gain employment. This is a bill that is sponsored by Cal Chambers, and I'm looking forward to provide you guys with more information as the details are being worked out. Kind of going along the lines of economic development, the Assembly member hosted a teletown hall recently on workforce development in partnership with the San Diego Workforce Partnership and Maricosta College's Technology Career Institute to kind of highlight the work that's been going on in the region to provide more opportunities for our workforce since the labor market has shifted in the past couple of months. Another effort that the Assembly member has spearheaded is on public safety. So you may have seen the Assembly members AB 1927 passed out of the Assembly with bipartisan support. This is a bill sponsored by our District Attorney, Summer Steffen. And this bill provides amnesty for sexual assault victims who refrain from reporting incidents due to drinking or drug use. She also recently hosted an online workshop for parents on online child safety, also co-hosted with District Attorney Summer Steffen and the San Diego Police Foundation to inform parents on their best practices for protecting their children as they spend more time online in a virtual environment. And the last thing I wanted to share was that our office has been really busy helping people with their unemployment benefits. So if you know someone who is having issues, it's been weeks, even a couple months since they've heard from the EDD, please refer them to our office. We'll be happy to assist them to get the issue resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. So the county has been very, very busy in recent weeks, and I'm sure Crystal has quite a bit to share with us. So I'll turn it over to Crystal from Supervisor Jim Desmonds' office.
We're not busy, we're just hanging out at home. Good morning, everyone. First off, I want to start off by saying thank you to the Oceanside Chamber. Our chambers have been invaluable in supporting the supervisor with messaging, but also getting information back to our office, sharing concerns with constituents, with business owners, community members, pretty much everyone, and that information it has been able to go back and forth more quickly and seamlessly, and it has helped with the messaging and the motions that the supervisor has made at the board meetings. So thank you, Oceanside Chamber. We appreciate it. A lot going on and a lot has changed this week. So I'm going to start maybe back with last Tuesday, which was the Board of Supervisor meeting. Every supervisor meeting, they have a COVID update where the county goes through and explains to not only the Board of Supervisors, but the general public, informational breakdown, and specifically a presentation was given on protecting our vulnerable population, which was a motion from one meeting before that, 2 weeks before that. So at the last Board of Supervisors meeting, Supervisor Desmonds made a motion to send a letter to the governor stating that we would like to be considered to open up wedding receptions, hotel meetings, limited conferences, private gatherings, request that the governor re-examine the request that was already sent to allow churches to fully open with appropriate social distancing, and then also guidance for street fairs, playgrounds, and team competition without spectators. That motion passed 4-1. It was sent up to the governor. Since that time, the governor kind of came out this week and said that that they have concerns about the triggers being hit in multiple counties in the state of California. San Diego is not one of them, but the county of San Diego is worried that we were going to make that list. So we've made that list 2 days in a row. On day 3, it moves you from, it's very complicated. First 3 days, if you hit 3 days in a row of triggers, then you get moved over to a watch list in the state of California. If you hit 3 more days of being on that list, so essentially 6 consecutive days of hitting triggers, you get on the naughty county list, is the way we're referring to it. Nice list, the naughty list. Once you hit that point, the governor at that time can do what he did yesterday in other counties, which is shut down certain sectors. One of those is bars and indoor services at restaurants. So the county was a little proactive and moved forward and said, we're going to stop, we're closing down bars that don't serve food and breweries that don't serve food. And there was a little confusion. It was also stated that wineries that don't serve food. That has since changed. So it's bars and breweries that don't serve food. Wineries are allowed to do outdoor winery wine service, even if they don't serve food. And then also those sectors can only be open from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. So a restaurant must close at 10 p.m. If there's patrons still in there and eating, so let's say they came in at 9:30, they can stay until 11, but they can't accept new patrons. So that's kind of where we are right now. There was also mention of beaches closing and what's going to happen, and that question was asked of Scott about Oceanside beaches. It's up to the local municipality if they want to leave their beaches open or not, but a lot of them are closing the parking lots. They're following suit with what the state is doing. So the way it works, and I know I've said this before, so I apologize for repeating myself, a county can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive than the state of California. So if the governor issues an order, we must follow suit. Same with a city. A city can be more restrictive than the county, not less restrictive. So it's important here that we maintain some local control, and that's what the supervisor's been advocating for. Give each county individual control, and then we can pass that along to the city to also make decisions that's best for that community. So we will continue, the supervisor will continue to advocate for local control from the governor. Every motion that's passed, the public health officer, Dr. Wilma Wooten, has signed off and accepted and found it to be reasonable. So she's been, kind of lock and step with the request of the supervisors at the meetings. So we do have another meeting coming up on Tuesday, and we've had a lot of people asking us, how do they call into the meetings and comment if they would like to under the COVID item, which is item number 4. If you need that information, I've been sharing it with all of our chambers, and Oceanside Chamber can provide that to you, or you can reach out directly to me and we'll get you that information. It does help in the decision making when we hear from business owners or community members on their thoughts about how COVID has impacted them and what's important to them in their community. So, and then lastly, I'm just going to touch on Sandag a little bit because it gets boring talking about coronavirus all the time. Sandag had a vote last week on their RENA numbers, which is their allocation of housing numbers. 4 cities had requested an amendment to their numbers. Lemon Grove, Coronado, Solana Beach, I can't remember the 4th one, I apologize. And the request was to do a reduction in the numbers that were allocated. So Coronado, for example, when they are looking at populations and creating what the allocation of housing numbers is, so Coronado is expected to build 1,000 housing units, they use the population of the Navy base to come up with those numbers. So Oceanside, they use Camp Pendleton population also to come up with housing numbers. Some of those cities felt that that was unfair. They requested an amendment, kind of pleaded their case. They took a vote down at Sandag. That amendment passed 14-5, kind of across the county, supporting what those cities had requested, found it to be reasonable. And then they called for the weighted vote, and that measure failed. So once again, our communities are being impacted by that weighted vote down at Sandag. So kind of keep your eyes peeled on what's happening down at Sandag and make sure that your voice is being heard, each of your cities. And if there's any questions or if anyone needs anything, please reach out to our office. And I hope everyone has a happy and safe Independence Day.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks for everything that you and your office are doing to communicate and advocate for our business community. We do appreciate it. We have a few organizations that we're gonna call on right now to give a very brief 60-second update if you have something. So I'll start with Risa with the San Diego County Water Authority.
Good morning, everyone. I wasn't planning on speaking, so I'm just going to say it's great to see you all. Couple of big issues going on at the Water Authority right now. One is our board last week approved our rates, our mid-year rates for this year, and it was voted in at 4.8%. Now, how that impacts each of the member agencies will be determined by the member agencies. So I would say you'll hear from the city of Oceanside shortly in terms of what kind of impact that will be. Some member agencies are going into their reserves to minimize the impact on rates moving forward. It was a very big issue. And unfortunately for us, some of the rates, the impact for us was the rates that we have to absorb from MWD down to San Diego. So originally it was at 20%, it got down to 6.8%, and now we're at 4.8%. So we're hoping that the hit for everyone will be pretty, not very significant, but we'll certainly keep you updated in terms of how that's going to impact everyone. Otherwise, not much else to report, but I do appreciate the opportunity to see everybody. And Crystal, I always really appreciate hearing from you and getting the update from the county, because I can't even imagine what you have to go through every day because it's changing so much. So thank you again. You guys have a good weekend.
Thanks, Risa. John, do you have anything for us from AT&T?
So the update on the bill to enable us to install backup generators did pass the Assembly and now goes on to the Senate. So we are appreciative of the Chamber's support in that bill, and I'll keep you updated as it moves through the Senate.
Thank you, John. Katie, do you have an update for us from SDG&E?
Good morning, everyone. Nothing too significant. One thing I just want to call out is at SDG&E, we launched another multi-year giving campaign that's called Energy for Others, and it's specifically targeting giving with nonprofits in the areas of civic engagement and social justice. So we have committed to give an additional $1 million in 2020 and following that in 2021 just for those two specific initiatives. So We're excited to launch that, and we're still here to support businesses that need help with bills during the summertime and that are impacted by the pandemic. So if anybody needs help specifically, they can feel free to reach out to me directly.
Thank you, Katie. Jeff, anything from the toll roads? All right, well, we'll go to last but not least, Gomaro. I know you must have something to share from Main Street.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody, for your updates. San Diego County is definitely in the forefront of all this, so thank you guys for your guys' leadership. Couple things, just want to give you guys an update on Oceanside Strong. We were able to raise about a little over $11,000. We were able to grant 13 businesses. It ranged from $375 to up to $1,000. I think we gave 6 businesses $1,000, so that was a really good incentive for those businesses. And thank you to all of you who donated to this campaign. It was really, really nice thing to keep this going. Lastly, I do want to mention that our second mural project is installed, and that's ready to be viewed by the public. Obviously, please just take your cars and drive around if you guys want to get out and visit our beaches. The mural is located on Horn Street and Civic Center Drive. There's 2 murals happening. One just completed last week, and that's on the west side of the wall of That Boy Good and what's the other one? The Northern Pine Brewery. And then the north wall is still being installed by our local artist, Isabella Figueroa, which is a young, inspiring artist. You guys should check out that mural. It's going to look really nice as well. And then basically, we're just trying to keep going with what's going on in our communities and how we can continue to stay involved and be relevant. But we do have a farmers market and beach services program, limited, but they're actually going on right now. So some type of revenue is coming into Main Street Oceanside, and we're staying alive so far. And thanks for your guys' support. And if you guys have any questions, you guys can just call me or text me or email me.
Thank you, Gomaro. And again, as I mentioned earlier, our next meeting will be on Thursday, August 6th. In November, we are facing a great threat to our Proposition 13 protections. So our meeting will be focused on that. I encourage you all to join us for that, but we will be sending out the invitations. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for their time today. And I just want to wish you all a very happy Independence Day weekend. And thank you again.